The invitation wasn't a surprise, it was a performance. Thick ivory cardstock, foiled in gold, perfumed just enough to sting. Inside, a note written in swirly, careless handwriting I'd known since university. Camila. Would love to see you at the gala. Black tie, no spreadsheets, no stress, just sparkle. Isla. No RSVP instructions. No personal message, just the assumption that I'd be there, just like always, invisible, polite, safe to overlook. That was the role Isla Duval always gave me, and I had played it so well for so long that she forgot it wasn't real. She forgot I'd left the stage years ago. We weren't close, not anymore. But she loved the idea of proximity. Liked being able to say, Camila and I go way back, as if nostalgia could double as credibility. To her audience, I was a harmless relic of her past, a friend who worked in something dull and respectable. Finance, maybe, spreadsheets, probably, she never asked, and I never corrected her, because some things are more useful when misunderstood. I ran my finger along the edge of the invitation. The event was a charity gala, the annual Moonlight for Mercy fundraiser, hosted by the Duval Foundation. Tickets were $10,000 per seat, held at a newly reopened estate perched on the cliffs above Miramar Bay. The Duval estate, or so the invitation said, but Isla didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the silent foreclosure or the shell corporation that swept in after the headlines had cooled. She didn't know that Silvergate Holdings, the new owner on record, was mine. I had signed the closing documents 6 months ago in an office with no windows, a recycled cup of coffee on the table, and a quiet attorney who called me ma'am without flinching. I hadn't told anyone, not because it was a secret, because it didn't need to be said. And that's the thing about real power. It doesn't raise its voice, it waits. I looked at the invitation again. Isla had chosen that venue for a reason. Prestige, legacy, the kind of place that looked good in pictures. She saw chandeliers and marble and assumed it still belonged to her. It didn't. The idea of showing up didn't excite me, but it did feel necessary. Not to prove a point. Not to start a scene, but to sit at the table she'd never thought I could afford to own. So I circled the date, pressed my navy blouse, and arrived exactly on time. No grand entrance, no entourage. Just steady steps through the back entrance reserved for vendors and owners. The staff didn't question me. They nodded. "Welcome back, Miss Ray." "Thank you," I said. And as the doors to the ballroom opened with a quiet hiss of air and wealth, I felt it. That delicate tremor before an earthquake. The hush right before the first violin note pierces silence. Tonight, no one saw me coming. That was the point. The room shimmered like a set piece built for applause. Everything was touched with gold. Gold on the walls. Gold in the napkin rings. Gold-dusted chocolate on the dessert menu. The chandeliers looked like they had been pulled straight from Versailles and reassembled with precision just for tonight. At the center of it all stood Isla. She moved like someone who had always known the cameras would be watching. Hair caught in soft waves, dress in mirror-shard silver, sequins throwing light like sparks. She laughed like a champagne cork had just popped in her throat. Effortless. Loud, meant to dominate the frequency of a room. She hadn't noticed me yet. She wouldn't. Not until it was too late. I made my way past clusters of donors. Some I recognized. A former professor's wife. A hedge fund heir. A TV anchor with that brand of face-lifted composure that only came with syndication. They all smiled in the direction of the light. No one looked left. No one looked down. That's where Isla had placed me. The last table before the glass railing. Ocean view. Far enough from the stage to miss the spotlight, but close enough to hear every word. Exactly where she wanted me. I sat down and let my hands rest gently in my lap. My dress was slate gray silk. Understated. Tailored. No logo. No shimmer. The kind of fabric that whispered instead of screamed. My heels made no sound on the floor. The only jewelry I wore was time. Isla was still busy air-kissing her way around the room. Her laugh followed her like perfume. She posed for photos as if every angle had been pre-approved. And maybe it had. She thrived on being seen, which is why she never saw me. I watched as the first course was served, a thin slice of beet terrine with edible gold. Predictable, the guests murmured approval. The wine flowed faster than the conversation. Then someone approached my table. Male. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Tailored tux, understated watch. The kind of presence that didn't need a name tag. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, voice low but firm. "Not at all," I said, gesturing politely. He sat. A pause. Then extended a hand. "Nathaniel Cross." I knew that name. Chairman of Sterling Equities. Old money, old power. The kind of man who never wasted his presence on things that didn't matter. Camila Ray. His grip was cool and exact. His eyes scanned once, then paused. "I've come across that name," he said. "Not a compliment, not a threat, just fact." "Probably in a portfolio review," I answered softly. His brow twitched in acknowledgement. "You're with Silvergate Holdings." "Among others," I said. "I structure quiet acquisitions." "Smart," he replied. "No press, no noise, just results." The orchestra in the corner played a warm swell. At the far end, Isla took the mic. "Everyone, thank you for being here tonight," she beamed. "You are all part of something magical, historic." Applause. She went on to thank the sponsors, the chefs, the guests who flew in from Europe. And then, with a smile directed vaguely in my direction, she said it. "And of course, to the estate itself. A place that's held meaning for my family for decades. This is home." Mr. Cross leaned closer. "You let her say that." I didn't turn, just smiled. She never asked. He gave a soft laugh, short and sharp. "Interesting." But I didn't say more, because the truth was already sitting at the table, and it wasn't in a hurry. The second course had just been cleared when Isla took the stage again. The lighting shifted, warmer now, focused just enough to give her skin the kind of glow filters could only dream of. Her champagne flute sparkled as she raised it, and the hush fell the way it always did around her trained, expected, choreographed. "Before dessert," she began, "I just want to take a moment to speak from the heart." A pause, she was good at those. Around me glasses froze midair. Laughter softened to a murmur. A waiter mid-pour adjusted his posture to avoid blocking the view. "I've been told," she said, smiling coyly, "that I've always had a flair for the dramatic." The room laughed, indulgent. "Of course you have, Isla. But I think that drama has its place, especially when it leads to reinvention." She moved along the edge of the stage, hand sweeping slowly like a curtain call. "Some of you have watched me stumble and rise, and stumble again, and somehow keep rising. Tonight is about that, about choosing the high road, about owning your space even when people tell you to stay in the background." Her gaze flicked across the room like a spotlight until it stopped. On me. A small smile crept onto her lips. "And of course, I want to thank my oldest friend Camila. She's here tonight and I just love that. Cam has always been grounded, a numbers girl, a little allergic to glitter." Chuckles. "She used to tell me that dreams need budgets, and she wasn't wrong. But tonight, even she gets to enjoy a little sparkle." I didn't move, Mr. Cross didn't either. Isla lifted her glass. "To the quiet ones," she said sweetly, "who finally learned to tag along." It landed exactly the way she wanted. One or two people laughed too hard. Someone clinked their glass without lifting it. And then, quiet. I looked up at her, eyes steady. I didn't flinch. I didn't return the smile, because something had shifted. Not in me. In the room, Mr. Cross stood. No microphone, no spotlight, just presence. His height wasn't remarkable, but the way the air bent around him was. The kind of stillness that made people put down their forks without knowing why. Isla's face lit up. "Oh, Nathaniel, did you want to say something?" He nodded once, then turned, not toward her, toward me. "Before we toast," he said calmly, "I'd like to clarify something." The stillness sharpened. Even the violinist paused his bow mid-stroke. He gestured lightly around the ballroom. "This estate, this evening, this legacy you've spoken of doesn't belong to the Duval family." A beat, one blink, "It belongs to her." Silence, then a ripple, chairs shifted. A dropped spoon clinked against china. Isla's smile stalled like a program buffering. "Camila Ray," he continued, "owns this property, acquired legally, managed discreetly. And tonight's event, He glanced back at her, then to me. Was booked through one of her holding companies. The breath left Isla's body but didn't make it to her voice. Her lips parted. Nothing came. Her hands tightened around the stem of her flute. You what? Her voice cracked on the last syllable. I met her eyes. I never said otherwise, I replied. Someone exhaled like they'd been holding it for too long. The lights didn't dim. The music didn't swell. No cinematic finale. Just truth, raw and unadorned, echoing in a room built for illusion. Isla looked around, expecting someone to laugh, to brush it off. No one did, not this time. The silence didn't collapse, it expanded. A full 5 seconds passed before anyone moved. 5 seconds of air so still it rang. Even the waitstaff stood frozen, holding silver trays like breath suspended in metal. Isla didn't sit. She didn't speak. Her mouth opened once, as if to deliver a comeback, a clever spin, a practiced laugh. But nothing came, because there was no script for this moment. She looked at me like the stage had betrayed her. Like the spotlight had quietly slid off her shoulders and found a new home, one she hadn't approved. I remained seated. Not smug, not triumphant. Still. Across the table, Mr. Cross placed his glass down with the kind of care reserved for ancient things. I've followed your holdings, Miss Ray, he said, voice crisp but not unkind. You've been thorough. I nodded once, thank you. Someone 2 tables over turned to whisper, but no words came. A man in a velvet blazer cleared his throat and didn't follow through. Conversations attempted to rise and died mid-breath. Isla finally lowered her glass. Her hand trembled slightly. She turned toward me, her voice no longer stage-ready. You own this. I didn't blink since last spring. Her jaw shifted. She glanced at the chandelier, then the walls, as if trying to find her reflection in the things she didn't realize weren't hers. But you didn't. You never said anything. You never asked. The sentence landed like a stone in water. Small, heavy, irreversible. It was the kind of line that wasn't meant to wound. It was meant to finish. One woman near the stage looked at Isla and quickly looked away. A man on the media team slowly lowered his phone, the red record light still blinking. He tapped to stop it. The music hadn't returned. No one moved to restart it because something had shifted, and everyone knew it. A truth once spoken does not ask permission to stay. I stood slowly, not to storm out, not to grandstand, just to leave when the moment had ended. It had already given me everything I needed. Isla stepped aside. For the first time that night, she didn't try to lead me, didn't try to follow me either. She simply stepped back, quiet, like a curtain that knew the act was over. I walked past rows of tables dressed in linen and good intentions. Past people who, an hour ago, hadn't thought twice about me. Past whispers that weren't cruel, just stunned. You've been here the whole time, someone murmured as I passed. I didn't turn. I just said, gently, always. And I kept walking. The hallway outside felt colder, more honest. My footsteps, steady on polished stone, didn't echo. They absorbed. As if the house itself had heard what happened and chose to let it settle. At the bottom of the grand stairwell, a young server in a dark vest looked up as I passed. He didn't ask who I was. Good evening, Miss Ray. Thank you, I said, and then I stepped out. Into the night. Into air not needing permission. Into stillness I had earned. The car door closed with a quiet finality. No one rushed after me. No one called my name, and I didn't expect them to. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. He didn't ask how the evening went, just waited. I met his gaze, calm. Michigan and 14th, I said. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. The engine hummed to life, and the city began to move again. Lights slid across the windows like slow rain. Tower silhouettes gave way to smaller buildings, then warehouses, then the half-renovated stretch of coastline developers called the next wave. That was where I was going. Not home, not yet. The Gala still clung faintly to my skin. The scent of sea air and citrus perfume, the feel of velvet-lined chairs and camera flashes. The echo of Isla's voice sharp, brittle, trying to hold shape as the room cracked beneath her. But it was behind me now. The car turned left onto a quiet boulevard. The road opened. The buildings thinned. And with each block, the noise fell away. Inside, I was still, not elated, not vindicated, just anchored. Some people chase power for the spotlight. I learned to wield it in the dark. The truth is, what happened tonight wasn't for them. Not for Isla. Not for the influencers or investors or men in pocket squares who suddenly wanted to know my name. It was for me, because there's something sacred about building something in silence, not because you're hiding, but because you don't need applause to know it matters. And tonight, the silence had finally spoken back. As we approached the corner of Michigan and 14th, the car slowed. On the right stood a building stripped to steel bones, half of it covered in scaffolding. A future no one could see clearly yet. I could. That was the next project, the next proof of presence. I looked out the window, watched a crane pivot slowly in the dark. Somewhere inside that concrete shell would be a rooftop garden. Below it, offices for small businesses. A community legal center on the first floor. Every detail already lived in my mind, long before the world would notice. The car idled. I didn't get out, not yet. I watched the empty lot next door. The one Isla once laughed at during a brunch years ago. Who'd want to build anything here? She had said, tossing her napkin onto a half-finished mimosa. It's a dead zone. She hadn't seen it. She rarely saw what didn't shine on the surface. But I had, and I always would. The driver waited, quiet. After a moment, I said softly, "You can take me home now." He nodded again, no questions. We turned back into the city. It was later now. Softer, fewer cars, fewer lights, but the weight in my chest remained. Not heavy. Not burdensome, just real, earned. As we pulled into the private entrance of my building, he stepped out to open the door. I thanked him, gathered my clutch, and stepped into the stillness of the lobby. Security nodded. No fanfare. Just familiarity. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The chrome doors reflected me back, calm and composed. Same slate gray silk. Same face Isla once called forgettable. But something had shifted. Not just in them, in me. The elevator rose, and I let the silence rise with it. The apartment was quiet, not empty. Just the kind of quiet that holds space for thought. I kicked off my heels, set my clutch on the marble counter, and walked to the window. The city glowed below. Endless, indifferent, I liked it that way. I didn't turn on any lights. Let the skyline speak instead. Let it cast its fractured silver across the floor, onto my skin. The kind of light that doesn't flatter but reveals. And then without permission it arrived. A memory. Old, familiar. Sharper now in the silence. We were 24, Isla and I. Sitting on the back patio of her parents' house after one of her fundraisers. She had kicked off her shoes and was swirling red wine like it meant something. I was quiet, calculating numbers in my head for a project I hadn't yet told anyone about. She looked at me sideways, smiling the way she always did before she delivered something heavy and tried to make it sound light. "You know, Cam," she said, "you're probably going to grow old and visible." I remember blinking. "Excuse me." She giggled, already on the second glass. "I don't mean that as an insult," she said, waving her hand like she was clearing fog. "I just mean, you're so quiet, so composed. It's like you're watching life, not living it. People don't notice girls like that. You're too, still." I didn't respond. She leaned back in the chair, eyes to the stars, and added, "But maybe that's your superpower or something, being unseen, like a shadow investor. Isn't that what you said you wanted to be?" She laughed again. God, that sounds so boring. That word, boring, it had followed me like a shadow I didn't ask for, not sharp enough to wound, but constant enough to shape. She didn't mean harm. That's the part that stung more. She believed it. Believed that stillness meant absence. That quiet meant irrelevance. That not performing meant not existing. She couldn't imagine that silence could be strategic. That invisibility could be armor. That watching wasn't waiting, it was learning. It was choosing when to speak so that when you did, no one forgot it. I remember finishing my wine slowly, staring into the deep red like it held blueprints. Because it did. 3 months later, I signed my first deal. 18 months later, I bought my third property. 2 years later, I built something she would one day step into and never see coming, and I never brought it up. Because some victories don't need to be paraded. They just need to be preserved. Tonight wasn't about that memory. But it echoed now, not as a wound, but as a choice. I had become invisible on purpose. Not to disappear, but to build uninterrupted. And now the world was starting to notice. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't. Behind me, the city kept breathing. The lights pulsed like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it settle. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't small. I wasn't late. I was exactly where I had chosen to be. And in that memory, where Isla had once labeled me forgettable, I found something permanent. Not revenge, not righteousness, only clarity. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments. Small things. A name that used to be misspelled suddenly got copied carefully from her LinkedIn. Emails came addressed as Ms. Ray instead of Hey, Cam. Invitations included +1s and embossed headers. And phone calls, the ones she used to initiate now, came first thing in the morning from people who used to forget she was in the room. The irony wasn't lost on her. They hadn't changed. Not really. They had recalibrated. A week after the gala, her assistant knocked on the glass wall of her office. "You're going to want to see this," he said, holding a cream envelope with a wax seal.